Okay, so hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the launch of our edited volume, Language Teacher Agency, Navigating Complex and Diverse Educational Context, published by Bloomsbury as an open access book. So whether you're joining us here in person at Monash University or tuning in live via Zoom from different parts of the world or watching the recording at a later time, thank you for being part of this event. We're delighted to have you with us in whatever format and time zone you happen to be in. So my name is Gary Bonner, and I'm one of the co-editors of the book, and I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Associate Professor Leonardo Velis, and Associate Professor Yvette Slaughter, and Dr. Min Wei Nguyen, who's also co-editor. Unfortunately, not able to be with us today. She sends her apologies. Okay. So we're excited to share this moment with you to celebrate the many contributions that brought this publication to life. So I'd like to start also with a acknowledgement of country. So we pay our respects to the peoples of the Kulin Nations on whose land Monash stands. We honour their elders, past, present and emerging, their ancestors and those who are educating into the future. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from which you may be joining us today and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. And if you're joining online, we invite you to share in the chat the lands in which you're located if you'd like to do so. So let me talk a little bit about the structure of the event. So we have both in-person, Zoom and pre-recorded presentations. And for the live presenters, we do have a strict timeline. So you'll be giving a 1-minute warning when your time's about to end. And then hopefully we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions after each of the live presentations, whether Zoom or in person. For those, we ask you to use the microphone so we can capture all that on the recording as well. So we'll have to take a 10-minute break, hopefully at about 10:30, and then we'll start again at 10:40 on time there. At the close of the presentation, all the in-person invitees are invited to stay. We have some catered food for you just to have an informal networking chat. Today's event is recorded and will be made publicly available. So for people online, make sure your microphone is muted, and if you would like to turn your camera off, you're welcome to as well. So I'll hand over now to my colleague here, Associate Professor Leonardo Velis, who will introduce the book and offer some opening reflections to frame today's event. He's done a runner. He's letting someone come in.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Leonardo Velis from UNE, University of New England, and this is just a real privilege to welcome you all and share a bit of our journey and what we sort of went through along the process of putting this volume together. Language Teacher Agency, a copy of which we've got somewhere in the corner there. We've got a display copy on Friday, which thank you, Gary. Language Teacher Agency, Navigating Complex and Diverse Educational Contexts. This is really a special opportunity for us to come together to celebrate the wonderful work that the editorial team, authors, publisher, reviewers, critical friends, colleagues, and so on and so forth, put into the collection of wonderful chapters in this volume. Throughout this time, I acknowledge some of the professional challenges, personal circumstances, sickness, loss of family members, amongst other obstacles that may have impacted our ability to respond to our writing or editorial responsibilities throughout the process. However, we acknowledge and truly value the remarkable commitment, insight, scholarly generosity and flexibility from contributors to this volume. Over time, which we have really embraced to bring the project to completion. Today, we not only acknowledge the completion of this collaborative endeavour, but we also celebrate in anticipation the impact these diverse and powerful studies will have on language, education, research, and practice. Just a little bit about the genesis of the project. This idea really started, grew out of a shared concern and commitment amongst the editorial team across different institutions in Australia, with the question, with the fundamental question, how can language teachers or languages teachers assert their professional agency in a world that is increasingly marginalizing their voices? So that was one of the fundamental questions at the heart of our discussions at the beginning of the journey, which we have pursued through the different chapters in the volume. And we are thankful to have your chapters in the volume that address, in one way or another, this fundamental question. As you know, we live in a complex and troubled world, and educational systems around the world are shaped and constrained by political agendas, ideologies, institutional demands, social inequities. And all these forces across the globe do not only merely exist in the background, but they actively shape what is possible in the lives of teachers, particularly language teachers, who must navigate multilingual realities, policy expectations, the diverse learner needs, ideologies, and so on and so forth. In this convoluted climate, language teacher agency is not a given. It is something that must be negotiated, cultivated, fostered, fought for, which is facilitated and constrained by the social, institutional, local, socio-political possibilities or impossibilities. Our motivation for this book really stemmed from a desire to bring attention to this struggle, and more importantly, to highlight the ways in which languages teachers navigate, resist, adapt, and transform their professional realities in response to these challenges. And just to close this overview, when the volume is available as an open access resource in just a couple of weeks' time, I would encourage everybody to enjoy the richness of 15 chapters in the volume in 3 parts. Part 1, that addresses language teacher agency and identity. Part 2, that addresses language teacher agency in structural and cultural constraints. And Part 3, language teacher agency for social, cultural, and linguistic responsibility. We hope you enjoy the chapters and the volume when it's available. Free access, open access to all of you in just a couple of weeks' time. Thank you very much for being here today.
Turn that on. And now I'll pass over to Olive, who will give our first Zoom presentation. Over to you, Olive.
Thank you very much. My name is Olive Nabukera, and I work at the University of Leeds in the UK. However, at the time of writing this chapter, I was based in the University of Southern California in the United States. And the chapter is titled The Visible Invisibility of Black Adult Educators in English Language Teaching. And that's part 3 of the volume. So my chapter is chapter 14. So I just want to take you through some of the aims of my chapter and things that I wanted to explore. And my focus was on Black English language educators, particularly in the United States. And the goal of the chapter was really to sort of highlight how Black English language educators negotiate their agency and representation. I was also very interested in the paradox of visibility and invisibility, because for my doctoral research, that's something that was clear to me, that kept coming up. And so I wanted for this particular chapter to take a step back and sort of look at how that works in the work environment, as well as the impact on identity and on agency. And I felt lastly that it was very, very important to sort of look at this topic because it's a little bit underexplored, particularly in thinking about Black teacher identity, in particular in English language teaching scholarship, in TESOL and in EAP scholarship. So the research question was, how do Black English language educators experience and negotiate visibility, hypervisibility, and invisibility in their TESOL EAP professional roles in the US? So my framework at the time for this chapter, I use the same framework for my doctoral thesis, which I then borrowed in order to write this chapter. I looked at 3 positioning theory, I looked at critical race theory, and also the invisibility framework, which was really important for me to sort of begin to break down how visibility works and invisibility and hypervisibility in the work environment. This was a narrative inquiry approach. I interviewed and sent out a questionnaire to 7 educators who identified as Black ethnically, and the criteria was they had to be US-based. They had to have at least one year experience of teaching in EAP or TESOL. And I used thematic narrative analysis to sort of analyze the experiences, being also, it was important for me to remember my own positionality as a Black educator that worked in the States for more than a decade, and how my own experiences sort of impact on how I interpret the data. And I tried as much as possible to be non-biased, but it's very difficult to do that in this kind of work. So that was sort of the background of the chapter in sort of presenting what the participants and the goal of the chapter. And I just want to take a couple of moments to talk about the highlights in the chapter. So the first one that I wanted to look at, I wanted to break down these 3 categories of visibility, hypervisibility, and invisibility, and then try and sort of break them down and see how they show up in ELT work environments for Black educators. With visibility, I talked a bit about tokenism, which is one of the things that came up in the discussions, and the idea that teachers, Black teachers, are sort of, because they are usually the only one or a few of the faculty, they are usually have to unfortunately go through tokenization and made to feel like they are representative of the whole culture. Hypervisibility is sort of the price for inclusion. And I talked about things like profiling and pigeonholing, which is you're in the institution, you're in the academy, but you still are being put or seen in a particular way. With invisibility, I looked at the idea that now we're inside meaning you're part of the academy, you're part of this institution, but at the same time, in many ways, you feel like an outsider. So I use this analogy of fresh water that swims in seawater as the experience of these Black teachers who kept talking about the fact that although they're educated and they're very smart and they've gone to these big institutions in the US, they still feel a little bit marginalized. And lastly, I wanted to look at agency within marginality. How much agency do teachers have? And so I talked about things like strategic visibility, which is really about some teachers in this chapter were leaders, were educational, were in positions of management, and what they were able to do regardless of the fact that they had to endure the forms of visibility, hypervisibility, or invisibility. And the last thing was selective invisibility, which has a lot more to do with the idea of concealment or silence as an option when you feel a bit marginalized, or you feel like you're one of so many and you don't feel represented, as a strategy that teachers use to navigate the work environment. So I'm proud of this chapter. I think it contributes something to language teacher agency, particularly the Black perspective. And I hope that it can add something to people that read it. Thank you very much. And my contact information is right there. If you need to contact me for any reason, please do. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olive. I know it's early in the morning where you are, but in case anyone had any questions for Olive, please feel free. Any comments, any remarks, any... Yep.
Thank you for that presentation, Olive. Now that you've moved to England, to the University of Leeds, are there parallels? Is this work you're going to continue in the UK context? What sort of parallels are there in your experiences so far with what you're reporting in your chapter?
Thank you very, very much for your question. I think in many ways, the experience of Blackness or how Black identity shows up is very contextual, and in America it's completely different. Without going into all of the details, it's sort of a different shape. It takes on a different feel compared to in England, where in England you're not only negotiating race but also class and other factors as well. So I now in this field, I've had to expand the way I look at issues of representation to also talk about decoloniality, which is sort of coming up now in the UK. Work has already been started to be done by the time I left the US, but that's something that we're working on now. And so it is something that it's not completely different, but it adds onto the conversation of Black representation, Black identities within academia, but more looking at it from a decolonial perspective. And that's sort of maybe the difference between the work that I was doing in America compared to now in the UK. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Olive.
Yeah, I also have a question here in the chat from Ilahe. Thank you, Ilahe. Maybe you can also see that, Olive, in your Zoom screen. I guess the crux of the question is, what's the significance of focusing specifically on Black English language educators? How does it contribute to the broader literature? Comment briefly.
I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying if you can make a brief comment.
Briefly, I think that why I personally focus on Black educators is because we have been underrepresented. And I truly believe that with underrepresented voices, if we have an opportunity to speak for people that maybe don't show up a lot in the literature, then why not? And being a student for a really long time, living abroad for a really long time, almost all my life, I have always been the only one. And so personally, I have read literature in TESOL and in ELT that sort of presents perspectives, but doesn't present the Black perspective. Yet there are Black teachers all over the world, and there's Black students in classes. So I do feel that focusing specifically on Black English language educators is necessary, because it's been something that's not been highlighted in scholarship or in research until now in the early 2010s, 2020s. So it does contribute to the broader literature on equity, because it's not just about race, but it's also what we bring to the classroom that is really fundamental to understanding identity and culture, and talking about diversity and inclusion. It does include the Black perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olive. All right,
thank you.
Starting us off with that wonderful presentation. We'll now move to the other side of the Atlantic, to Bahrain. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, and I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you also for the event and for the invite and bringing us together. I'm hoping this is language teacher agency has been an area that I have been researching with my colleagues at University of Texas San Antonio, and I think it's gaining a lot of increasing importance now and increasing recognition with the more global networks being in place. So what we try to do in this chapter, we looked at language teacher agency in the context of teacher candidates in the US and teacher candidates in Turkey, when they were collaborating together in an intercultural exchange, a virtual telecollaboration. We looked at how they negotiate their identity and agency work in this discursive space. Now, what made this space more important or unique for the agency to focus on. They explain themselves in two colleagues that are not familiar with that context. So they made discursive choices to explain their experiences, their background, and their current social context to people who have never been there, and and with the questions, this became more obvious that when in the negotiation, when they ask questions, for example, the teacher candidates here explained what a school district is to Turkish service teachers. School district is a US phenomenon. I don't know if Australia or England also runs with school districts, but they explain that context to their colleagues. So when they made these choices, we use Pantix framework that they use the three dimensions of iterational, projective, and practical evaluative elements. In this case, they brought together their past, current, and future emotions into their teacher agency. So here's an example. I always admired my teachers throughout the years and thought about being like them one day. I moved around a lot when I was little, so I got to have a lot of different kinds of teachers. Here, the candidate is talking about the past and what it meant for them. Each of them had a different impact on me, and it always made me feel safe and comfortable. I want to be able to make a difference in kids' lives just as my past teachers made in mine. And this is the projective part where they are talking about the future, but the future that they imagine has been informed by their past and past experiences in creating their agency together. And here is another example. And this is how we also presented in the chapter that we, using different fonts, we coded the iterative, the life histories, the practical evaluative, cultural values and beliefs, present emotions, and the projected, the long-term aspired teacher identity. So I always have encountered lovely teachers and seen that even someone who has not bound with you may have a meaning for you or your life. And I want to touch people's lives and try to be a bridge that goes to their dreams. And I want to hear, Arda Hocam, I did this thanks to you. Furthermore, I love this to inspire someone, since the teacher should be a person who inspires his or her students. Also, sometimes we see our teachers more than our families, and in time we become a family. I want to be a home for someone who needs a backbone. And so many of our quotes were such sincere expressions of their identity and agency, and how they negotiated it in this virtual intercultural space. So yeah, and we concluded that when we looked at, since we are creating more global networks, first it gave our teacher candidates a space, a discursive space, to reflect on their emerging teacher identity and agency. When they explained it and thought about it to their with their colleagues from a different intercultural context, they became more aware of their own context as they explained it to them. That is all for my part. If you have any questions.
If no one else has is there any questions online? So something. Perhaps I could ask, if I'm understanding correctly, the teachers, the participants involved were in different contexts internationally. Are you kind of doing that work where teacher candidates have that opportunity to interact? You have colleagues all over the world that are involved in this chapter. Are you continuing that work, that really valuable work in helping people, teacher candidates, see and experience other people's perspectives? Because that comparison of where your experiences converge and diverge is a really powerful one.
Thank you. Could you go back to the participant slide? So this draws from an ongoing project since we started in 2017. And around 1,000 teacher candidates went through from this since then. Things have changed a lot. And teachers are more connected now more international connections now than we had first started. But within that framework, we're still continuing it. We have my teacher candidates who are studying to be elementary school teachers, and they're going to support their multilingual students' English development. So here, every elementary school teacher is ESL certified so that they can teach the English while teach math. And their peers in Turkey are studying to be ESL teachers, EFL teachers, ESL EFL teachers. And we also did this with French partners as well, and for a few years. In that one, they were also studying to be ESL teachers. A few of the questions was for us focusing on teacher agency. We have them meet for 8 weeks with weekly activities. Since it's 8 weeks, because that's the only time semesters align. And there's also an 8-hour time difference, so a lot of the activities are asynchronously done.
Okay, thank you very much, Babon, and thank you for joining us from Texas. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We'll move now to our sorry. Coming a little bit closer to home, introduce now Mayreen Henneberry-Lewin, who's going to talk to us about her chapter 6. Are you there, Mayreen?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks. And apologies for the voice. I've got a bit of a cold. So I'm currently at the University of Melbourne, but when I wrote this, I was at the University of Tasmania. And when I did the research for the chapter, I was at the University of Hong Kong. And I was working primarily with student teachers coming from mainland China to Hong Kong and planning to return to mainland China to teach TESOL. So the aims of the study were really to look at those student teachers' possible selves over the period of that 1-year program in TESOL, Masters in TESOL that they were doing. And within that, to understand how their past experiences before coming on the program, and in a sense that habitus that they brought with them, shaped their future teacher orientations and their future teacher possible selves. And to look at their sense of agency and see how that developed over the course of that 1-year program. So I guess the question was really focused around those 3 aims. The methodology that we adopted was, or that I adopted was, using it was qualitative methodology using interviews, qualitative semi-structured interviews. And within those semi-structured interviews, I used what are called sociograms, which really comes from the idea of network analysis, but qualitative network analysis in this case. And I've put an example there. I'm not sure how clearly you can see it, but essentially what those sociograms are intended to do is capture the dynamic nature of, in this case, of the possible selves, and also the sort of, I guess, the evolution over time, but also the interaction between different possible what are called alters, so influences. So what you'll see on that is there are 4 quarters. We've got family, we've got friends, we've got education, and we've got other. And so during the interviews, the participants were encouraged to, with the help of the researcher, to plot the different kind of influences that they felt were impacting on their possible selves, and to talk through those. And we then did 3 interviews and revisited those sociograms across those interviews. So that enabled us to see the changes that might be happening and the ways that those sociograms may be expanded, or in many cases actually shrunk during that year. So we did those 3 interviews, beginning, middle, and end of the program. Interview 1 was looking very much at the language learning history and those initial motivations for teaching, getting them to reflect on their possible teacher selves, how they envisaged those at that point, and the influences that they felt contributed to those notions. And then in interview 2 and 3, we revisited that content to see what changes happened, if any. And in terms of the analysis, started with qualitative structural analysis, which is really a kind of descriptive approach to describe what is going on in those sociograms in each one, and then across the 3, and then a thematic analysis that brings together the sociograms and also the narrative of the interview. So highlights of the chapter. I guess 4 things stood out for me. The first one is the idea that agency is deeply shaped by cultural and familial influences. So the chapter focuses on 2 particular participants, Ling Chi and Ellie. Obviously, those are pseudonyms. Ling Chi very much showing a trajectory of low agency right from the beginning, and very much sort of conforming to mother's expectations. And this was really, and this is, I think for me, I think this really kind of resonated with a lot of my experience teaching, particularly students from Confucian heritage context who might have ended up in a TESOL career, not necessarily because that's what they chose, but because that's what they've been told is good. It's a good career for a woman in China, particularly if you want to get married, or it's just this is what you're expected to do, etc., etc., rather than being allowed to sort of take ownership of that, I guess, career aspiration. Ellie, on the other hand, was quite different. So she had actually made an active effort at the beginning to resist the pressure that she felt from family to follow other careers, particularly in diplomacy and so on, and had made her own decision that this was where she wanted to be. And that was partly influenced by experiences babysitting or doing little bits of teaching here and there that had really kind of ignited that passion in her. So those were two very different trajectories. What we saw was that agentic orientations, or agentic possible selves in this case, were very much linked to motivation and career commitment. So whereas Ellie had a lot of ownership of that, and she was therefore very committed throughout and was able to sort of exercise a lot of agency in terms of challenges that she might face. Ling Chi was quite different. And so the trajectories that we saw across the two were very different. And so we see that agency develops over time, but it develops quite unevenly. And in some cases, particularly with Ling Chi, we could see sort of progress, and then something would happen on the program and maybe a poor mark or something like that, and suddenly she'd be back at square one. The interesting thing for me as a teacher educator, I suppose, is that by the end, what we saw was that Ling Chi was kind of at the point of saying, look, I'm really not planning to commit to teaching. I'm going to get this done, and then I'm going to give up. And so when we think of, teacher attrition, particularly in those early years, I thought that seemed quite an important thing to kind of consider and reflect on within my professional role as well. Ellie, on the other hand, was very much looking forward to what was ahead. And when we talked about possible challenges that they might encounter in their career, those trajectories really reflected in how they engaged or saw themselves engaging with those challenges, with Ellie really thinking about quite practical ways of how she might mitigate those challenges, and Ling Chi sort of having that mindset of saying things like, well, this is just what it is, and I'll be expected to teach that way in China, and I've just got to do that. But that's fine because I'm going to give it up anyway, so that's okay. So I guess for me, I thought it felt like a really significant piece of research, just in terms of thinking, how do we bring those previous experiences and that kind of sense of ownership into our teacher education programs? I think maybe I speak for myself here, but typically I'm not sure I put a lot of focus on what has come before when I'm talking about, I guess, those novice teachers. It's a little bit different, I think, if you've come to teaching when you're sort of, through another career, your 40s, your 50s, and so on, versus you've come straight out of your undergraduate degree and you're going into teaching. I think that makes a bit of a difference because you haven't had that process of thinking, really, where do I want to be? Where do I really want to go? And I think just bearing that in mind and thinking about how do we factor that into our teacher education so that we can encourage that ownership in those students may have an impact later on those early stages of attrition as well. So yeah, that was my research, and my contact details are there if anybody wants to get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marion. Round of applause. Are there any questions from the floor at all? We have a question over here. Thank you.
Hi, Marion.
Hi.
I'm interested in sociogram that you use in the methodology, and I saw that you highlight education, family, and friends, and others. And I'm wondering, in Hong Kong context, when you're doing the study there, is the policy not even arise in their narrative and the time when they're doing that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, particularly because we were working with mainland students, and there has been a shift in policy in terms of English language education. But to be honest, no, it didn't come up in the narrative. I mean, that could have come up in the other category, but it didn't. What tended to come up there was more things about particularly famous people that they were influenced by in terms of their love for English. or experiences, as they say, in teaching, which kind of fell into more the education, but they didn't really, and I don't know if that's maybe because of the age group of those participants, that maybe that wasn't, you know, if you're coming out of high school through university and then straight into that master's, maybe that's not really been front of mind for them at that point.
Thanks so much, Mary, for joining us.
Sure. Is there a question in the chat, Gary?
Oh, sorry, I just moved to my computer.
I'm wondering if you have considered conducting follow-up research to explore how specific intervention might support. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Elijah, for that question. Actually, one of the things I'd be really interested in, I haven't done it yet because I went on maternity leave this past year, but I think the idea of vision building that comes a little bit from the work of Dernier, but probably even before that, might be quite interesting to explore. And I know that Kubanyova has talked a bit about that as well in relation to teachers. Just how do we use vision building exercises to actually enable robust possible selves to form during the teacher education. I do talk a little bit about that in the chapter, but yeah, good question. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Okay. So I'll now move to our first pre-recorded presentation.
Greetings from Scotland, everyone. My name is Ming, and I'm based at University of St Andrews, UK. It is my honor to give you a quick introduction to our book chapter today on behalf of my co-author, Dr. Minh Huệ Nguyen from Monash University. As you can see from the slide, our chapter is entitled Vietnamese Pre-Service English Language Teachers Agency in Negotiating the Tensions Between Aspired and Experienced Identities. In this study, we aim to examine 3 Vietnamese pre-service teachers' agency in negotiating identity tensions in the process of learning to become English teachers in Vietnam. Our study was guided by 2 key research questions. The first one is, what identity tensions did pre-service teachers encounter in their professional learning? And second, in what ways did they exercise agency in responding to the identity tensions? In terms of methods, we adopted a qualitative case study design, and our study was conducted at a foreign language teacher education university in northern Vietnam, which we called Babel. And we had 3 focal participants, 3 pre-service teachers called Anna, Haley, and Tina, all of whom enrolled in the English language teacher education program at Babel. To collect data for this study, we used narrative frames, a series of sentence starters, to guide our participants in writing narratives about their language learning experience. After that, we conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews to explore the themes arising from the narrative frames. As for data analysis, we used thematic analysis guided by concepts such as aspired versus experienced identities, identity tensions, and we also follow the ecological perspective on language teacher agency. And here are some highlights of our chapter. First, our chapter confirms the existing literature on the topic by showing that tensions between aspired and experienced identities did indeed motivate pre-service teachers' agentic responses. For example, our first participant, Anna, faced the tension between her experienced identity, a teacher who had a relaxing approach and frequently used games in her teaching, and her aspired identity of a very effective teacher who could meet all the curricular demands. The data shows that Anna exercised her agency by constantly monitoring and adjusting her teaching to make sure that her students could achieve the curricular goals and still felt relaxed and could also learn something useful for their future work and life. Meanwhile, our second participant, Haley, who described herself as a strict and stick teacher, aspired to become a humorous and engaging teacher. Because Haley viewed humor as an innate quality, she instead invested in enriching her background knowledge because she believed that if she could share her extensive background knowledge with students, she could still become an engaging teacher despite her lack of humor. While confirming the findings from the existing studies, our chapter has helped extend the language teacher agency literature by focusing on the under-researched pre-service teacher cohort and the Vietnamese context. Drawing on the findings, we argue that language teachers education programs should offer pre-service teachers opportunities to make explicit the aspired versus experienced identity tensions, and then help pre-service teachers develop the agentic responses so that they can grow professionally. This point has brought me to the end of our brief chapter introduction today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch via email addresses on the screen. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of this book launch event. Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll move to our first in-person presentation. Okay, over to you, Ruth. Is it switched up yet?
There we go. Hi. Thanks very much. So I'm here representing myself, Gary Bonnar, and our colleague Mei Hui Wang. The three of us have been undertaking a longitudinal study since 2020, which in the larger study has had a focus overall on identity of pre-service language teachers as they progress into their early careers. So for this particular chapter, we wanted to focus in on the theme of agency within that data, and we focused in on one particular participant, Claire, who showed some really interesting trajectories through her growth as an early career language teacher of German. And so our aims were to understand the agency of these pre-service teachers with the focus on one particular participant over time, and as they progressed into this early career stage as a teacher of languages in Victoria. So the research questions guiding the chapter in particular were, what is the trajectory of agency renegotiation among early career languages teachers as they transition from pre-service education into their early career roles? And then secondly, how do internal and external factors influence this trajectory? So to answer those questions, the data that we gathered over time started, as I say, back in 2020, and we used Q methodology to present a series of statements to the participants. They sort those into, the levels to which they agree with the different statements. And so we had a range of statements, some of which drew on agency, others more broadly on identity issues and feelings of attachment, cultural attachment and identity attachment to the languages that the students were going to teach. And then we interviewed the participants about those responses to the statements to understand their feelings and their reactions to those different ideas. And so over time, we then undertook those statement sorts and interviews with the participants. And Claire showed us a really interesting trajectory as an early career teacher. She, one particular example was in her concept of the native speaker teacher versus non-native speaker teacher. She was not a native speaker of the language she was teaching, and started out in her earlier interviews with us feeling a lack of confidence and a lack of agency around being a legitimate teacher of that language without the native speaker status. Over time, we saw her agency shift and her develop much more confidence in her role and the way that she could connect with her students as a fellow non-native speaker of the language. So we can see through Claire's narrative that she encapsulates this trajectory from novice and language learner through to language teacher and aspiring to even further kind of agentic power as a teacher, and the growth of her sense of agency over time and her teacher identity evolving and strengthening each time we re-interviewed her. We developed this sense that, you know, unsurprisingly, perhaps, her confidence and sense of agency building over time and with experience in the classroom. So we found there are some contextual factors that might impede individuals from achieving more agentic capacity in their teaching, and we need to maybe understand these better. There's some scope to look into some of these issues further, and we really felt that for teacher educators and the mentors of early career teachers in schools, there's some really important findings that, you know, they need to encourage a process of self-reflection for these beginning teachers, and that this kind of needs time and actual focus to help develop a sense of agency and the associated teacher identity that sort of moves hand in hand with that. So yeah, overall, we really kind of highlighted the potential for mentoring in schools and the need for ongoing professional learning and professional development for beginner teachers and early career teachers as they sort of transition from pre-service education into the classroom. Do we have, I could talk more, have I been too quick?
In the chat from Olympia, how does the type of pedagogy employed, such as immersion or CLIL or total physical response, influence teachers' professional growth and identity as they transition from novice to aspiring practitioner?
Really interesting question. I guess that wasn't a particular focus of ours, wasn't necessarily to compare different pedagogical approaches. We hadn't kind of purposively sampled different teachers because we followed them from them being in our pre-service class. But I would anticipate, yes, some interesting potential findings from, you know, the different expectations in different school contexts and with different pedagogical approaches. Certainly, and sort of anecdotally, with one of my pre-service teachers who had one of their very early teaching placements in an immersion program in Melbourne, teaching French. It was a very quick shift from, you know, a very heightened nervous state of will my language competence be enough to teach immersion French to, you know, potentially some background speakers of the language. But she did very quickly shift. She wasn't one of our participants, but she did very quickly shift in terms of confidence and that sense of agency towards kind of comfort in the new context. But yes, absolutely different pedagogical approaches, I think, different challenges.
Run the microphone so that questions can be asked and run it back to you.
Oh, okay. So you're focusing on one single participants, right? My question is, of course, before deciding these participants, there might be some other participant, but what make this participant so outstanding so you decided to choose him beside of others? Thank you.
Thank you. I think because we could see in what she had told us this journey, a trajectory from, you know, and some really clear, the native speaker, non-native speaker journey being one of them, of kind of feeling invalid to start with as a non-legitimate speaker of the target language through, you know, quite a noticeable shift in sort of confidence and sense of empowerment and legitimacy in the classroom. So she really stood out to us for that clear trajectory. The other things, sorry, I have to, my brain not focusing necessarily. She also kind of showed us that she could anticipate future challenges, and we could sort of see in her data that she, you know, once she anticipated there would be challenging things for her as a teacher, was quite proactive in seeking out and building her own sense of agency around those challenges and perceived challenges and overcoming them. And so we picked her because, yeah, we could really see, I suppose, the sense of agency where our bigger study hadn't necessarily sought to look at agency particularly. She really showed that proactive stance. Thank you. That's good.
I apologise for, just to keep things on track, we do have a break coming up, and perhaps you can direct your questions to Ruth during that break, if that's okay. If we move on to the next.
Just very quickly, there's another question in the chat, so from Elahe, talking about the contextual factors. Maybe I can just very quickly talk about this participant. She was someone who had been to Germany a couple of times, and then so she was reflecting on herself in that experience and looking at also back here, learners of English and how they sort of sometimes were in a situation where they just needed to put themselves out there and not be fearful of making mistakes. So she was trying to draw from the different experiences both in the target language country and then back here looking at other learners of languages in the context and trying to reflect on her own feelings of how she was managing that sense of maybe lack of authenticity or lack of legitimacy. So it was a really, this was a particular thing about Claire, that she had that ability over time to reflect from a range of perspectives, which was quite both powerful and also inspiring for us as well. Okay, thanks for the question, Elahe. Now to our next pre-recorded.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy. We're sorry that we are not able to participate in this great event. So we'd like to thank all the editors for organizing this excellent book launch. And today I'm going to introduce this chapter co-authored by me and Professor Andy Gao, entitled The Development of Collective Agency Among Language Teachers in a Professional Community. Well, I think the other presenters probably has already elaborated on the importance of having teacher agency in this era of all kinds of changes, right? All kinds of new stuff that requires language teachers to become empowered agents who need to take control of their professional practice and development. And this chapter particularly focus on the collective agency and identity. We used ecological perspective to conceptualize agency as something achieved, as not and not as merely a capacity of possession of the individual. The ecological perspective also emphasized that agency is shared among individuals in a given community or social group. We would also like to claim that collective agency is more than just collaboration. In fact, previous researchers has argued that collective agency is intertwined with collective identity, such as shared commitment, identification, and group membership. So this study focused on multilingual research team in a Chinese university, which consists of 8 language teachers who teach different languages and also research different languages. And the premise of this study is that we do not assume that a team is a community. So we also draw on COP theory to help us to inform the data analysis. Basically, according to COP theory, a professional community is built upon the synergy of 3 dimensions, including a joint enterprise, mutual engagement, and shared repertoire. And here's our research question. How did collective agency emerge and develop in studied professional community? And this is some basic information on the 8 participants who were interviewed. As you can see from the table, they teach different languages, and also they have a slightly different language educational background, either in English language education, applied linguistics, Japanese language and cultural, intercultural communication, and so on. Apart from interviews, we also did a non-participant observation of the whole team for about 1.5 years and collected artifacts related to the group. Based on data analysis, we identified 2 themes. The first one relates to transforming an institutional defined group into a professional community. basically, first of all, the team leader showed strong leadership in developing a joint enterprise. As you can see from the table 1, they organized a range of group activities during this period, including group meetings, seminars, inviting external speakers, attending conferences together. They also organized an international conference in the university. And not only this group leader, but also the other participants actually were observed to be very cooperative in organizing and also participating in these collective activities. So their continued participation in collective activity will also contribute their relational knowledge and trust. That is, they somehow know each other's research area, they were familiar with others' research projects that were ongoing, and also they have also built up this trust in each other's capability of doing good quality research, which somehow also helped with their mutual engagement. That is, they started initiating collaborative research projects. And also their research sharing these different kinds of occasions also made this circulation of applied linguistic theory or methods possible within the team, which becomes part of their shared repertoire. And also, meanwhile, we identified the emergence of collective identity in the process, as some of the participants claim that see themselves as a team or have this sense of belonging based on their commonalities of research interests and directions. And theme 2 is related to exercising collective agency in the professional community. According to the data analysis, they were found to enact collective agency at the intellectual and emotional level. First of all, they were found to make agentic actions collecting research, collaboration, and consultation. As you can see from the figure, this illustrates the collaborative relationships that were existent within the team. So basically, every single member of the team, they were involved in collaborative relationships with others, and many actually were involved in multiple collaborations. They also found to co-regulate one another's professional activities. For example, particularly when they were involved in collaborative relationships, they felt less lazy. They were compelled to follow the research plan. Even though they are not collaborating, they can feel this broader co-regulatory network within the team. So they felt the need to catch up with one another. Based on the finding, we'd like to highlight 2 points. One, collective agency is likely to emerge only when language teachers develop a sense of community, and this community can exert influence on them. So in line with previous research, our study reviewed that collective agency begins with individual agencies, such as these team leaders and also other participants who were being proactive in organizing and participating in the collective activities. And based on that, they were able to build a professional community and also gaining membership of it. Second, collective agency can be achieved in different ways intellectually and emotionally. So for example, they were able to provide a unique input based on their different linguistic expertise. They were also able to mobilize their research expertise and resources and take charge of the parts of the project which they were most capable of doing. Last but not least, they were able to co-regulate each other or engage with a broader co-regulatory network. And thank you for, that's it. Thank you for listening. And if you're interested or you have any questions, you're welcome to email us. Thank you all.
Final presentation person before the break. So I'll hand over to
Great, thank you, everyone. I am, to keep us on track, I'm going to give a truncated version of the presentation. So I'm presenting on behalf of my colleague Julian Choi and I. We're in the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne, and our chapter was on understanding linguistic repertoires, language, identity and agency in pre-service teacher language education. So as educators of pre-service and in-service TESOL and languages teachers, bringing a heteroglossic perspective or a plurilingual perspective to our teaching and research is really core to what we do. But it's important as language teacher educators that we take a critical stance towards the theoretical lens we bring to our teaching and research, because neither monoglossic or monolingual or plurilingual perspectives, none of them are neutral or apolitical. And we remain mindful of the cultural, linguistic and educational journeys that our students take and of their likely future teaching contexts, because we understand education and language to be culturally and politically constructed and deeply intertwined with issues of power and inclusion and exclusion. So we're aware of the antagonism that can exist between the contemporary heteroglossic perspectives or approaches to language teaching and learning, where language is recognised as a complex reflection of sociocultural lives of speakers, and the valuing of monolingual competencies in schools and language classrooms. So when our students go on to placement or when they begin teaching in schools, the curriculum, pedagogy and assessment, as well as broader school practices, can be rigidly monolingual and monocultural in their approach to learning. So given that part of developing an agentic language teacher identity is recognising the lived experience of languages as complex and shaped by the socio-political and social-cultural contexts, our research aimed to explore how we can support language teachers to interrogate their own linguistic lives and the forces that have shaped their experiences, and to investigate how visual spatial methodologies can approximate. It's very hard to capture a lived experience of languages, so to approximate linguistic repertoires as a dynamic representation of self in interaction with the world. We collected a range of autobiographical materials. In particular, we used language portraits to investigate how pre-service teachers understand and position their linguistic repertoires. We drew on Bush's work on language portraits, which focuses on the connections between linguistic repertoire, language ideologies and lived experience of language. So the data included the portraits, written narratives across the semester, and interviews at the end of the semester. So thanks, Gary. Through the use of language portraits, the participants conceptualised their linguistic repertoires as a dynamic organisation of languages, dialects and semiotic resources used in various communication contexts, so across social spheres, as well as across time, so a reflection of their past, present and future linguistic selves. If I can just pick out one example, the language portraits really allow a very rich use of metaphor. So just to pick one example of the heart is always a prominent metaphor connected to notions of intimacy and belonging, whether it just be with a family in a language you just use with family or with broader national identities around language. But the heart was also a place of conflict, with several of the participants using the heart to depict tension. So this can be an ideological tension or a tension across beliefs and cultural practices, where decisions can be made when you're a multilingual or multicultural person. Decisions can be made or ideas can be thought about from different perspectives, which can create challenges in decision making. So the notion of tension could be seen not just in the heart, but across various aspects of the portrait with blending or twisting of colours and shapes. So the autobiographical activities were effective in providing a window into the intimate and functional aspects of language for the students, but they also moved beyond the individual, with a key part of the activities being the sharing of lived experiences with classmates. So this dialogic process facilitated a deeper understanding of agency or non-agency experienced by others. So it allowed participants to reflect on how their experiences converged or diverged with their fellow students. So the reflective process made visible the ideologies and experiences that had shaped their linguistic repertoires and helped grow a critical language awareness among the teacher candidates. But the sense of agencies participants articulated from that point diverged, with some participants understanding and articulating a deeper understanding of the structural, political and ideological forces that shape their experiences, but arguing that it was a status quo and it was beyond their power to change or influence what happened in the classroom. Other participants expressed considered thoughts as to how heteroglossic perspectives could potentially be integrated into teaching practices, or at the very least into their relations with the students and how they interact, engage with respect and draw on their lived experiences themselves. So Julie and I would argue that bringing this lens to teacher training is important because it provides a foundation for teacher candidates to navigate the complexities of language education with a more critical and reflective lens, and to potentially be able to push against or challenge some of the monolingual norms in the education system.
Thank you, Yvette. Any questions in the chat or from the floor? I've got a question over here, Maxi.
Thank you very much for a very interesting research. And as a person who entered Master of TESOL at Monash University, my experiences also resonate very well with the findings. And it's not just for me to learn, but also to reconfirm how my agency and identity as a language teachers have grown out of the Master of TESOL course. And your topic on language repertoires and the focus on the language itself, it's really something that makes me reflect on my past journeys. So I don't actually have a question, just more of the comments that this kind of work is very important for language educators. And I do like your findings in terms of critical awareness of language, because language educators, we focus on the language to teach the students, but at the same time, the repertoires of the teachers in terms of language also have changed throughout the training. Just a quick question, actually. Oh, sorry, I have a question. How can I ask, how do the findings influence you as the researchers in terms of your language repertoires?
It's on now. Okay. Yeah, so the impact of what we talk about, and it's our responsibility as language teacher educators to be aware of that. And when we're arguing that people need to develop a critical language awareness, that it's contextualised, an understanding of where teachers are coming from and where they're going to. Okay. All right. So we have a break now. Is that right,
Yeah.
Gary?
So.
Oh yes. Okay.
Sorry, I'm sure everybody will enjoy the beautiful, very insightful language portraits in the book, and I'm particularly interested in language portraits because of the metaphorical potential. Quick question: any plans, or have you been able to collect language portraits to understand candidates' multilingual repertoires over a long period of time, to understand how those conceptualizations, metaphorical conceptualizations of self and of their multilingual repertoires have changed over time?
No. Is that a quick answer? As you know, we have such short amounts of time that we have with our students. I've certainly done it across a lot of contexts, different contexts, in Australia and internationally. I was very impressed with Marin's 1 year long study. I thought that was very impressive. But as you know, it's very hard to track longitudinally these kinds of things, but certainly something we're always aiming for, but not yet.
Okay, thanks so much, Yvette. Okay, we'll take a short break now, a little bit shorter than we planned, so maybe just 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:45 here, so 1/4 to the hour wherever you are, and we'll continue with our presentations. Thank you. Okay, I know that was a very short break, but we're going to get started again now. So if you can grab a seat. So our next presentation is again a pre-recorded one. So let me start this.
Hello everyone, I'm Dai Chujie. It's a pleasure to introduce my chapter, Teacher Agency of Synchronous Online One-to-One Language Teachers, an investigation through critical instance in teaching. The study was conducted between 2018 and 2019, at a time when online language teaching, particularly one-to-one synchronous instruction, was still relatively new in teaching Chinese. The participants were 3 novice teachers with limited experience in online teaching. In this study, I focused on critical instances, those unexpected, challenging moments in teaching sessions that disturbed the teacher's plans or confidence. While these moments initially caused discomfort or uncertainty, and later became triggers for reflection, adaptation, and professional growth. The study addressed 2 research questions. 1, how was teacher agency enacted in critical teaching instance? And 2, what are the factors shaping teacher agency in the online teaching context? To investigate this, I adopted a qualitative case study approach. Each teacher conducted 10 Zoom-based one-to-one teaching sessions. These sessions were recorded, and after each session, the teachers wrote reflections, identifying important moments. I also conducted 3 stimulatory recall interviews with each participant. Where we reviewed selected video clips together to explore the thinking and decision-making process. Here are 4 insights from the study. 1, teacher agency is ecological and bidirectional. Teachers interpreted each incident based on the past experience, present beliefs, and future aspirations. The decisions not only addressed immediate challenges, but also actively reshaped the teaching context. For example, when one teacher felt her authority was challenged by a high-status learner, she later integrated his interests into the lesson, successfully rebalancing the power dynamic. And 2, critical instance offered a fine-grained lens to observe agency in action. This instance required teachers to reassess their roles and pedagogies. For instance, one teacher redesigned her activities to better engage a learner, transforming passive sessions into meaningful learning interactions. And 3, there are 3 main factors influence agency. The first one was social cultural influences, such as Confucian values around age and authority, which affected the teachers to assert the teacher identity, and the online one-to-one teaching format, which highlighted learners' personal identities and required individualized approaches. and emotions, such as frustration and self-doubt, which catalyzed the reflection and motivated pedagogical change. And number 4, teachers renegotiated their professional identities and used technology adaptively. For example, one teacher initially struggling to establish authority gradually embraced the role of facilitator, finding it more effective and aligned with her learners' needs. To conclude, this study shows how critical instincts can unlock teacher agency at a micro level, allowing teachers to actively interpret, adapt, and grow in response to challenges. It highlights the importance of preparing teachers not only pedagogically, but also emotionally and culturally, especially for the unique demands of online and individualized teaching environments. Finally, I would like to thank the participants, my supervisors when I conducted the study, and the reviewers of the chapter. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Over to you, Jen. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jennifer and I'm presenting my chapter today. It's based on a larger project, a qualitative case study of teachers based in an international school in China. So I'm just presenting the account of 3 teachers out of a pool of 30 teachers that I interviewed for this research project. So the aim of this research project is to look at how the teachers that are teaching students in the final year at this international school, our state curriculum, our Victorian Certificate of Education, so they can use that certificate in China and then transition into foreign higher education, mostly Western universities such as Australia, the US, UK, New Zealand, Canada, and so forth. So what I was looking at in particular was what were the pedagogical practices that these teachers used in their teaching, and how do they support student learning throughout this process? And in doing this research, I came across some very unexpected findings. Was that it was a bit more complicated than just pedagogy. There was a whole notion of identity and cross-cultural transition and border crossing involved within this research. So what I want to do is I want to look at what were these cross-cultural practices that the teachers embedded to support the students from moving from studying this Australian curriculum in China so that they could be supported in Australian higher education. So then my overall research question was, in what ways is teacher agency shaped through enacting the VC curriculum for EAL learners at a senior Australian school in China? So there's a lot of heavy words there. So before we move forward, I want to unpack what those key words are. So first of all, when I talk about VCE, it's Victorian Curriculum Education. I forgot. Certificate. It's Monday. Now, the interesting thing is, when we look at international schools, before we dive into this kind of school, we have that traditional view of schools are set up for foreign students to learn their home curriculum so they can come back and study where they originally were set up. But with our new age of transnationalism, we're having international schools set up for local students wanting to travel abroad. And with that comes a whole paradigm shift on what curriculum are we teaching, what values are we embedding in these schools. And this is something that hasn't been spoken about, this new discourse that's being, that is emerging in this space. And then what my research found is that you're having teachers, not just your stereotypical international Western foreign teachers, but you're having a mix of teachers who've come from overseas, from English-speaking countries, but also you have local teachers who speak the local language and have been trained in local systems, and they're working together in international schools. But what we have here is we have students who are from the Chinese context, who have had very little English exposure, studying a VC curriculum. So that is a curriculum that is designed for native speakers of English in English-speaking country doing subjects that is going to be difficult for students to be studying that context. So our teachers find themselves, for example, if they're a chemistry teacher or if they are an English teacher or if they are a physics teacher or a maths teacher, they have to teach through EL pedagogy before they can teach their own subjects. So what we found is that they had to inadvertently become an EL teacher without being trained as an EL teacher in the first place. And then that leads to my findings of, in order to do this, the teachers designed their own model. So there's no set practices within the literature or the theory. So the teachers to come together, you had your local teachers and then you had your foreign teachers sing together, and they developed what they called was a bilingual immersion model, where they had to screen all the students and identify what were their language proficiencies before they can start teaching them the VCE subjects. Imagine you go to another country and you're asked to study something in that native language and you've had no exposure to that language. So this is what we're asking the students to do at this school. So they had to screen the students and had to teach the same subject at 3 different levels of capability. So students who had strong English understanding, they were taught physics with a foreign teacher who couldn't speak Chinese. We had students who were in the middle at that range. So they either had a bilingual, thank you, or a native speaking teacher, or they had low level capacity where the students had a local teacher. And what this research found was that because the teachers were constantly switching between the languages and the content, that actually impacted their identity as teachers, because their teachers going in, I'm a physics teacher, but then they became an EL teacher. And because they weren't trained in that sense, then it led to tensions within their own identity. And then I just want to finish off with this idea of when we invite teachers to teach in an international context, what exactly is their identity in that space, and how does that locality influence identity? And any questions? Nope.
Any comments or questions? Nothing in the chat yet, but there may be some come through later. Anyone want a question now? Yep. Yep.
Yeah, just I don't know if it's a question or not, because it's really relates on my study at the moment, where the but this one is a secondary teacher, right? Yeah, I'm studying the higher education educator, and then I found similar thing, where the educator are switching back and forth with the languages. It's not because they need to learn. I mean, they need to do it purely in English. However, because of the commitment, and then they have to move back and forth like that. And then I was interested because I didn't find, I'm not touching about the identity itself, because move back and forth like that, and it means that, does it mean creating a new identity, or is it going to be the same identity as let's say a content teacher and then a language teacher, or they can be both? I don't know, I just need your opinion.
That's really interesting. I guess it varies on the person. What I found in my particular context was that with the local teachers, for them, it didn't faze them as much because they knew they had to speak in Chinese, whereas the international teachers who came in, they did not expect this environment. They assumed, I'm going to teach chemistry, for example, and then they realized no one's understanding what I'm teaching. And I guess that did impact their self-efficacy, because they felt like their teaching wasn't good. They felt they couldn't communicate with their audience. So identity was a theme that unexpectedly emerged in that research.
Okay, thanks so much, Jen. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Lang Anh, and I'm currently working at the University of Foreign Language Studies, the University of Da Nang in Vietnam. This is my honor to present to you the chapter I contributed under the theme Language Teachers Agency Amidst Structural and Cultural Constraints. So first of all, I'd like to give a quick summary of the context. When I conducted the study, primary elite teachers in Vietnam were confronting multiple changes simultaneously. The National Foreign Language Project 2008-2025 resulted in moving compulsory elite teachers instruction from the secondary level down to the primary level and approving the communicative language teaching approach. In the 2018, for the first time, each subject had multiple textbook choices and teachers were granted autonomy in textbook selection. And in the first years of the policy, one core curriculum and many textbooks, COVID-19 hit, requiring a shift to online learning, online teaching and learning, and this event created a unit tensions between top-down policy implementation and the embedded cultures of compliance among teachers. And therefore, I carry out this study to examine how primary elite teachers exercise agencies in times of changes and investigate what external and internal factors shape teachers' agencies. And this led to the research question that you can read on the slide. Now, to answer the two questions, I employed a like-cost socio-cultural perspective that treat agencies not as something teachers possess, but as something they achieve through dynamic interaction across times and contexts. This framework examines three interconnected dimensions of agencies, including identity, pedagogical, and relational. This approach reviews agencies as a temporally situated, shaped by past experiences, present constraints, and future aspirations. So in terms of methodologies, I used longitudinal quality research. 7 participating teachers working at the 6 school in a cities allow me to conduct semi-structured interview and classroom observation in the academic year 2019-2020 is the onset of the policies, and the 2021-2022 after the pandemic. And this is the finding of the chapter. So first of all, we will answer the questions how teachers exercise identity agencies. It is an interesting finding where initial challenges turned out to strengthen the identity of primary elite teachers. Many participants who were trained to teach at the secondary level were assigned to primary level. This was not their desires due to the perception of lower status of this level. Some had to teach classes outside the athletics such as music or craft due to staff shortages, which left them feeling like a substitute babysitter. However, the longer they stayed in the roles, the less strain they felt. They began to appreciate the opportunity for stable employment and professional training offered by the National Foreign Language Project. And in terms of pedagogical agencies, teachers had to adapt lessons using their personal creativity to make the lesson effective. They used many adaptation techniques and were proactive in improving their pedagogical competence by joining professional competitions. However, the promised autonomy in textbook selection was a paradox because teachers didn't really have an opportunity to raise their voices. And regarding to relational agencies, regular professional meeting of the local teachers' communities, which include both primary and lower secondary levels, provided some teachers with a platform to showcase their competencies and gain credibility when their job status was unstable. For one participant, the meeting offered learning opportunity, and a participant shared that close relationship with leaders can be useful for exercising policy agencies, as she could navigate desired action through the leaders by means of informal conversation or discussions. Interesting, COVID-19 was an undesired event that ignited more cooperation among teachers, because suddenly everyone was unfamiliar with online teaching, and learning from each other became necessary for survival. But when things calmed down, cooperation also faded away. So, what factors enable and constrain agency execution? The data show that policy implementation design play a significant role. Gradual and well-prepared changes in teaching methods, moving to student-centered and more communicative approaches enhanced teachers' agencies. Yet, the rapid and superficial textbook policies, which led to a mistaken sense of autonomy, hinder agencies. Another external factor is sustained and practical support. Without this, teachers found professional training will not really apply to learn new things or unlearn old mixed perceptions. The interesting case of COVID-19 could serve as an example where an unwanted change could actually bring professionals closer together to deal with an intermediate crisis. And self-efficacy is recognized as an internal factor for both identity and pedagogical agencies. So, what the findings tell us? Agencies are in fact contextual and co-constructed. And even in the context of top-down policies like in Vietnam, teachers' agency can still be enabled by well-informed and well-prepared policy design. Furthermore, training rooted in real classroom issues is always expected. Next, the more policymakers can do to empower teachers professionally, the more they can do to enhance the identity and pedagogical agencies. And for relational agencies, encouraging teachers to cooperate and learn from one another is most feasible when they share concrete, immediate challenges, such as implementing new teaching methods or responding to unexpected changes like the pandemic. External pressures, whether from crisis situations or structural professional requirements, can initially catalyze collaborations, but sustained cooperation requires embedding these collaborative practices into regular professional structures and creating ongoing shared purposes. And this is all for my chapter. Thank you very much for the opportunity to presenting the finding of my chapter. I regret that I can't attend the event in person, but I want to congratulate the team on the book launch. I'm confident it will be a great success, and I'm very proud to be a part of this project. So thank you very much.
So then we'll move to our next in-person one. So Associate Professor Kim Dang.
This on.
So that's on.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to the book and to this important book and to present today about our chapter. So my name is Kim from Faculty of Education, Monash University. I'm presenting on behalf of my co-author, my colleague and friend, Dr. Minh Huệ Nguyen. And our chapter is entitled Exercising Teacher Agency in Response to Demands of Practice, Insights from an Australian TESOL Online Placement. So the title already tells a lot about the focuses of our chapter on agency, on demands, and online placement. So just a little bit of the context. So given the rapidly changing educational context around the world, there is a clear need for an agentic teacher workforce in response to constant changes and complex demands facing the teaching profession. And we can also see that apart from learner diversity, now there's generative AI. So there's a lot of demand. So how can teacher education support and prepare teachers to be agentic? And with the for English language teaching, With the rapid digital technological changes and English being the international lingua franca and the continuing from the COVID-19 pandemic, online English language teaching programs are growing. And the online teaching enables English language teaching to go beyond the geographical borders and creates a demand for language teachers who can teach online. So what it means is there's a need for the extent for some kind of online language teaching placement to prepare TESOL teachers for this reality. And against this backdrop, online teaching placement is a nascent area of research, and that's where our study fits in. So the aim of our chapter is to examine a postgraduate teacher exercising agency in response to demands of practice during an online placement within a Master of TESOL program at an Australian university. And unlike many, like the majority of research on teacher agency in our area of language teacher education, our study adopts a cultural, historical, theoretical perspective to conceptualizing teacher agency. And we view teacher agency as encompassing the teacher's subjectivities and deliberate actions to act on new demands. And the teacher agency both shaping and being shaped by the environment in which agency unfolds. Teacher agency is viewed as enabling the dynamic between the person, the subject, and the institutional practice. But it is also oriented by the person's motive, but all at the same time driven by the demands of the practice. And that agency is capable of transforming both the subject, the person, and the practice. And this theoretical approach allows our research or the research to analyze both the dialectic and the dynamics between the subject agency and the structure. That is like theoretically quite a challenging looking at subject and agency. And the subject with agency here is the TESOL teacher. And the structure refers to the situated institutional practice of online teaching with its specific demands. The framework allows us to examine teacher agency from teacher perspective, while also accounting for their relationship with the world. And guided by the theoretical framework, our research question for the study include, number one, what motives does the TESOL teacher brings to the online placement? So we take into account their motive. And what demands does the teacher recognize when teaching in the online placement? And how does then the teacher exercise agency in response to these demands? Using a single case study designed, our study sought to understand in depth the complexities of one teacher's agency in online placement. And the teacher here is Samira. And the online placement took place in the final semester of the two-year Master of TESOL course at an Australian university. And the university partnered with a private international education institution based in Australia, but then connected teachers with online English learners from different parts of the world. And the teachers, they taught school students based in China, and they had to use the in-house curriculum. And so Samira was a 39-year-old female teacher from India, speaking Hindi and Punjabi. She's taught before, but she never taught someone from China who not sharing the same mother tongue. And the data include a range of interview, focus group discussion, written reflections, lesson plans, and other relevant artifacts. So there are some of the highlights from our chapter. So highlight number one is that, most importantly, being the first study that theorized TESOL teacher agency from a cultural historical perspective, drawing on the integrated work of neo-Vygotskian theories, Edwards, Heidegger, and Sechenko, the study has examined the teacher's individual subject-centered perspective, but also related to his, her multi-level relationship with the world. And this has potential to generate new lines of inquiry into teacher agency with many implications. And highlight number 2 is that the chapter provides a clear link between the theoretical framework with the data collection, data analysis, and findings to illustrate how that theoretical framework could be employed in research. And highlight number 3 is the study also provides quite an interesting case study about Samira's transformative agency in teaching English to a Chinese primary student who's got a beginner English, and during an online placement when the teacher and the student did not share the same mother tongue. And so you can imagine. And so the data, the analysis revealed that Samira came to placement with different motive. And one of the motive is to teach a student and develop herself professionally, but also to complete the TESOL placement requirements. And so, but then she reported demands commonly experienced by teachers teaching in online, like with technology and engaging students in online placement. But also she perceived demands very specific to this activity setting of this placement, like you teach English to a young beginner learner without sharing the learner's first language. So Samira exercised agency in response to how she perceived the demands. And her agentic response was oriented by her leading motive and corresponded with the demands that she perceived. And it also depended on the activity setting and the resources available to her. So I try to fast track it here, that the data analysis also shed light on the intricate dynamic of Samira's exercising agency in response to demands, leading to transformation of her teaching practice and leading to her transformation of herself as a becoming TESOL teacher. And highlight number 4, which is I think is very important here, is that the study provides important contribution to research on teacher agency and TESOL, especially in relation to the roles of emotion, cognition, and motive in shaping teachers' agentic response. Growing research acknowledges the role of emotion, but this study extends further by revealing the role of motive in understanding their emotions. And the emotions and their associated motive played a role in how a teacher responds to the demands. And in that way, it also extended previous research by eliminating the role of cognition placed in the enactment of agency. And talking about cognition, then I can move on to what it means for teacher education. And the diagram in the middle here captures the dynamics between different aspects of exercising agency, like cognition, motive, and so on. So finally, so because of that kind of cognition and emotion exercising within the agency, there's implications for fostering TESOL teacher agency through mediational spaces within language teacher education and the placement settings to support teachers in navigating complex demands when they teach online, why they develop as teachers. So there are 2 types of mediational spaces at play, like those that mediated her understanding of demand. So you have to understand the demand first, then you know how to respond to it. So we can mediate by help them to shape how they should understand the demands and then shape the way they respond to the demand. And that, I think that there's a lot here, but that brings me to the end of my sharing here. And I really invite you to engage further with this chapter for further nuances about the study. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Kim. I'm sure there are plenty of questions, but what we'll do is we'll move on because we're running out of time. I'm just going to go to our next 2. Oops.
Aloha mātakou, greetings from Hawaii. My name is Priscilla Leal, and I teach both undergraduate and graduate courses, and I supervise pre-service teachers at the College of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I'm excited to share with you my chapter on Language Teacher Agency for Social Justice, Meaningful Experiences During Teacher Education, which Greetings from Hawaii. My name is Priscilla Leal, and I teach both undergraduate and graduate courses, and I supervise pre-service teachers at the College of Education at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I'm excited to share with you my chapter on Language Teacher Agency for Social Justice, Meaningful Experiences During Teacher Education, which is part of this incredible edited volume. In our increasingly uneven world, as Penny Cook describes it, issues like domination, discrimination, and social inequalities are still very much prevalent in language education. We constantly face deficit views of multilingualism and social and educational inequities, which highlight the urgent need for interventions to address these disparities. My chapter explores how critical language teachers develop conscientização and agency for social justice. So conscientização is a term the Brazilian philosopher and educator Paulo Freire argued should be adopted without alteration into English. But when used, it is often translated as critical consciousness. Conscientização is an individual's ability to notice social, political, and economic contradictions. Conscientização is an individual's ability to notice social, political, and economic contradictions and take actions against these contradictions. This action component is actually very closely related to agency for social justice. While conscientização fosters agency by encouraging individuals to critically engage with their social contexts, agency, on the other hand, can enhance conscientização by encouraging active participation in critical reflection and transformative action. So developing conscientização among critical language teachers is deeply connected to promoting their agency for social justice. However, there's a significant gap in our understanding of these transformative processes. To address this, my chapter examines the experiences language teachers interpreted and derive meaning from in developing conscientização and agency for social justice during their teacher education programs. Focusing on teacher education programs can provide us with a nuanced understanding that can be crucial for designing programs that can support educators in teaching language for social justice. So this study draws on data from interviews with 29 in-service English language teachers from 15 countries. I use positioning analysis to analyze their narratives, specifically focused on what I call their narratives of adulthood during their teacher education programs. And the narratives revealed three main insights into how conscientização and agency for social justice developed during their teacher education programs. First, this development is multifaceted. It's an ongoing process, and it requires continuous reflection on how our individual and collective actions affect the world. So in Amanda's narrative, for example, highlights how she recognized a gap in her understanding of LGBTQIA+ issues, despite her awareness of feminism, underscoring the interconnectedness of various forms of oppression. And Jessica's story also demonstrates that even knowledgeable teachers can hold misconceptions, emphasizing that conscientização is not a linear progression, but a dynamic process that requires openness and, again, continual reflection. Second, the development of conscientização and agency for social justice comes about through praxis, which is the authentic union of action and reflection. So Pepper and Alex's experiences with humanistic pedagogies, which prioritize student voices and real-life connections over grammatical correctness, highlight how recognizing contradictions in traditional practices prompts a reevaluation of teaching priorities, that's the reflection, and a commitment to creating a supportive learning environment, which is the action. And third, it is the profound impact that various influencers, such professors and friends, is also evident in these narratives. So both Pepper and Alex attributed their shifts in perspective to influential professors who not only taught about alternative approaches, but also modeled them. And these mentors served as catalysts for reevaluating traditional practices and emphasizing this transformative power of education beyond rote learning. These findings offer valuable insights for integrating conscientization and agency for social justice into language teacher education programs. As teacher educators, we can incorporate exercises that prompt teachers to notice and articulate the social, political, and economic contradictions and encourage purposeful, reflective practices and expose them to real-life examples of advocacy through education. By doing this, we have the potential to cultivate a generation of educators who are not only aware of social injustices, but are also equipped to bring about positive change. And so I invite you to read my full chapter, and I hope it provides you with insights into fostering social justice in language education. I welcome your questions, comments, and any reflections you may have. Mahalo. Thank you for your time.
Gary, for those who we are running just a little bit late, we have one more on pre-recorded presentation and one more face-to-face presentation for those of you who are able to stay with us just a bit longer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Johanna Tigert. I'm a university lecturer of education at the University of Turku in Finland. Much of my previous career was spent in the United States as a teacher and teacher educator. I'm glad to be able to share my chapter, The Negotiation of Plurilingualism by Teachers in a Finnish Heritage Language School, which came out of my dissertation research. It was really nice to be able to go back to that data one more time. If I had to reframe the question that I asked in that dissertation, back then it would probably go like this. How do heritage language schools develop students' multilingual language and literacy skills within adverse language ecological conditions? So thinking about adverse conditions being a very small heritage language like Finnish, trying to exist in a much more powerful language context, English in the United States. The aim of this chapter was to investigate the tensions that exist between the heritage language school bubble that teachers try to create and its plurilingual surroundings, focusing on teacher agency. My research question was how do Finnish heritage language teachers enact their agency while negotiating plurilingualism within an HL school located in the US? This is an ethnographic study where I observed, I interviewed, and wrote personal journal entries as the formal data collection methods. Some highlights from the chapter, there was a tension where on the one hand, the heritage language school itself was a de facto plurilingual space, and it was constructed partially through the agency of the teachers. For example, anything parent-facing was often in English because not all parents spoke Finnish. However, during instructional hours, teachers enacted their agency by giving both implicit and explicit messages about their HL-only policy. So they, for example, if students spoke English to them, would recast the answers in Finnish, or they would even say, this is a Finnish school, please speak Finnish. And students either complied or didn't. These instructional decisions were firmly rooted in their professional beliefs. One was their background as teachers from Finland, where teachers are granted very much agency over much of the instructional decision making. And also their language development beliefs that told them that maximizing the amount of Finnish used, especially in a context that was all permeated by English otherwise, would be the best way to develop Finnish. So there was no room for translanguaging or code switching, which research has shown might actually help develop heritage languages. So what could then change this situation and help position plurilingualism as less of a threat would be strengthening the role of heritage languages themselves and heritage language education as a system. But of course, in the United States, this is and will be very challenging. Thank you, as always, to the Finnish school parents, teachers, and kids. And here's my email if anybody is interested in asking questions about my chapter. Thank you so much.
We'll move to our final in-person presentation, and I'll hand over to you, Leonardo.
Thank you. Before anyone jumps out of the meeting online, I'd like to once again express my profound gratitude to particularly the Faculty of Education and most specifically the bilingualism, multilingualism, plurilingualism research group in the Faculty of Education. Thank you for having us. Thank you for putting everything together, for giving us support for us to be able to hold this event. Okay, chapter 10. Thank you to my co-authors as well, Yvette at the University of Melbourne and Finex Lavu, Finex and I at UNE. So chapter 10, if we can go back to the previous slide. Thank you, Gary. Challenging monolingual discourses for agentic spaces, constraints and opportunities for language educators in the Chilean education system. This particular study is really coming out of a larger project that looked at English language teachers in Chile addressing the ways in which they address, navigate, resist and contest and challenge monolingual, monoglossic, monoepistemic discourses and ideologies in the context of Chile. So within that context, within that space of trying to understand how teachers navigate this very complex environment in Chile, we looked at the data through the lenses of language teacher agency to understand how teachers assert their professional agency and exercise their professional agency in a context, Chile, in the Chilean context. That's as you can see there, that has gone through, oh, it's not there, a context that's gone through significant cultural, linguistic, socio-political changes in the last 3 decades. Chile being the first, just to give you some facts here, Chile was the very first country in Latin America to embrace neoliberal ideologies and ideologies around higher education, marketization, and so on. So it was the very first country in Latin America to embrace neoliberalism back in the mid-80s. So since then, Chile has gone through a series of changes in education, particularly in language education, where the teaching of English as a foreign language is sort of embraced as the only sort of legitimate language in the country, with great aspirations for socioeconomic mobility and so on and so forth. So within this complex space, we wanted to examine the impact of education policy, curriculum assessment, and teacher education processes on English language teachers' ability to assert and exercise their agency and effect change in the Chilean education space. The guiding underlying research question was, how do current education policies and curriculum frameworks in Chile enable or constrain English language teachers' professional agency and capacity to implement pedagogical change. We employed 2 different frameworks to look through the data, to interpret the findings, one being Southern perspectives, to acknowledge, embrace, highlight, and give voice to Southern voices and Southern epistemic perspectives on agency in the Global South, and also the Douglas Fir Group model to understand teachers' agency in Chile, using the 3 dimensions of the Douglas Fir Group models, model framework. Some of the highlights of the chapter basically showed, number 1, ideological frictions in terms of a complex interplay between strong ideological influences around native speakerism, the legitimacy of American and British English only, and sort of the erasure or the neglect of other varieties of English or other languages within the country. So that sort of complex interplay between ideological influences, the development of policy and curriculum and pedagogy for English language education in Chile. Also decontextualized curriculum and sort of monoglossic, monoepistemic perspective on the teaching of English in Chile. A particular element that came out was the disconnect between the curriculum, the ambition around bilingualism, which the country doesn't know what and why they want it for, and what it is, and why they're pursuing the idea of a bilingual country at some point. So there's a bit of a big gap in terms of policy ideologies about, yes, let's become a bilingual country by 2030 or whatever. And the realities of classroom practices, which are very much disconnected with curriculum requirements, curriculum expectations, and the ideological thinking that Chile wants to become a bilingual country by a certain time. And finally, agency and positioning, some disparity around the constraints and opportunities to assert agency, teacher agency in the public and private schools. There was a particularly interesting element in terms of how teachers in the public education system and the private education system voiced and expressed the ways in which they assert and they find and create opportunities to exercise agency. Obviously, issues around resourcing, class sizes, curriculum demands, and Kim talked about demands, so curriculum demands and workloads and so on and so forth, which sort of impact teachers in the public system more heavily than teachers in the private system, and the avenues they use to assert and exercise their teacher agency. And finally, thank you, Gary, just a few takeaways. We can see that despite the ideological tensions in language, teacher education in Chile, teachers find and create intentional opportunities to resist monoepistemic, monoglossic paradigms and discourses and ideologies in Chile, and they do create meaningful and very relevant opportunities within their classroom spaces to embrace other languages, other racial and epistemic perspectives on what it means to learn a language, and not necessarily the English language, but also other varieties of English, and not just the dictated American, British sort of dual perspective of English in universities and in schools. Also, there was a great sense of pedagogical and professional responsibility to bring life to the curriculum, and that was a quote from a participant. So they do feel that professional responsibility to translate the curriculum in more meaningful ways. In the absence of inflexible leadership, some participants said in the absence of inflexible leadership, teachers leverage their capacity to engage with others, and thanks to those folks who spoke about mentorship and collaboration and communities of practice, which is really coming through various chapters here, how they collaborate with other peers to enact change and transformation. And finally, a noted difference in availability of resources and material arrangements between private and public schools, which certainly impacts the ability of teachers to exercise their agency. So we've come to the end of our session today. We tracked pretty well, yeah, with time. I mean, a few minutes late, but thank you very much, everybody. Yes? Of course.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm particularly quite interested in the resistance that your participant performed to the mono-epistemic. Maybe you can explore or elaborate on what forms of resistance that your participant performed.
So thank you for the question. One of the things that came out of the data very clearly, speaking to us very loudly, was this discourse of American and British English being the only legitimate varieties of English, which come through the curriculum, the national English curriculum in place, the syllabus in English language schools and schools. So that was quite pervasive. That was quite prevalent through the data. So teachers do resist that view, that ideology of English, American English and British English being the legitimate varieties of forms of English, and they do question. They, like in the data, teachers said, like, why and what for? British and American, we don't have a British or American English ourselves, so why should we care about that? So one participant said, yeah, why should we care? So they sort of embrace other varieties of English in their practices, using online and multimodal resources to raise awareness of other varieties of English and other languages as well, like South African, Black Englishes, Haitian English, and so on. So at that level of practice, in terms of using resources, online resources, multimedia resources, to raise awareness of the existence of other varieties, was one clear form of practice they showed in terms of how they resist this dual perspective on the legitimacy of English in terms of American and British.
Okay, on that note, I think we'll wrap it up now. So I want to say thank you very much to all the people who joined us online. Really appreciate you sharing this celebration with us. Thanks to everyone who's joined us here in person. There's on that slide there, the left QR code is to the bilingual, multilingual, plurilingual group here at Monash University. And the right side is the QR code for the book, which you'll be able to access, open access in, I think, 2 weeks' time. So once again, thanks everyone, really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you to everyone online. Thank you.